Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Silverspook, and this is the Silverspook video on Tsarpunk, the Eurasian struggle, and connecting the world island. But that's like, well, actually, it's about Shadow and Bone, and then those other topics might show up sometime along the course of the stream. But yeah. So Shadow and Bone, I don't think I have it up there, but it is a Shadow and Bone is an original, or it's a Netflix show. It's on Netflix. It's based on a series of I think it's called Tsarpunk, but it's basically Game of Thrones like, but 1800s rather than medieval, alternate world fantasy, political intrigue sort of books. And so, oh, hold up one second. Yes, I would like to dismiss this. Um, yeah. So anyway, so Shadow and Bone is a show that is basically, it's. I haven't, like, yeah, full disclosure, I haven't watched all of season two. Haven't watched all of season one. In fact, I have not watched probably as much as I would like to have. But from what I have seen so far, I definitely see the similarities in positive ways. I know Game of Thrones got like a lot of bad rap after the last couple seasons. I don't know what people think about it, but I remember, like, for the first many seasons, it was a very good show. And just for my own self, because as I have brought up in the last video, or the video minus two, you know, Neofeud, which is of course the game that I'm the creator of, and it is a cyberpunk adventure, but it also has an overlay, like in the Steam description, it's like it has overlays of the political intrigue and aspects of the social and political elements of Game of Thrones. That's part of why I got the name Neofeud. It comes from neo-feudalism, which of course is related to the feudal alternate world reality of Westeros in Game of Thrones, and a lot of the intrigue between the families in Neofeud. Intrigue between the different royal families, feudal families, like the Clinton Bush. So, for example, in Game of Thrones, there were the there were the Lannisters, the very wealthy golden-haired family. There were the Tyrells, the Rose and second most wealthy family. And then there were the Starks. That's the most of the main characters in the more honorable family, which oftentimes will wind up with your head getting cut off, etc. And everyone in your family being murdered in the middle of, let's say, a big celebration day. No spoilers, but so Neofeud. So Game of Thrones was a show and a book series, right? Based on Song of Ice and Fire. So Shadow and Bone is actually very much related to, the Song of Ice and Fire. But just trying to get a picture of that, so while I'm on that topic. And so Game of Thrones is a show, and actually Pedro Pascal, everybody's sci-fi, zombie apocalypse, and all around daddy, got his big break in Game of Thrones. But anyway, so in Game of Thrones, the characters are, it's very as George R. R. Martin said, based on the War of the Roses. It's very medieval Europe, and that he said is actually like this place and these people were just terrible, right? And they're constantly hurting each other, killing each other, oppressing each other. Life is nasty and brutish and short, and everyone is vying for their own prestige and wealth and dynasties, and even to the extent of hurting their own children, killing their own children, family members killing each other. And so George R. R. Martin said that, like, the War of the Roses period, right, which is one of the many periods of great turbulence and violence and suffering in, let's say, Europe, that period was, as George R. R. Martin said when he wrote Game of Thrones, it was far worse in real life. And Game of Thrones is pretty nightmarish and terrible. If the average person that would be born there would have been a peasant, would have been a commoner, and your life, you would have died early, marching off to get yourself killed, killing other impoverished peasants, right? And that would be the same for Britain, France, Spain. That was just normal life. By the time you turn 25, you would have been dead, and you would have suffered for most of your life with backbreaking work, dying of diseases. So it was a really rough. Now, if you were royalty, if you were one of the top 1% of the population, then you would have been slightly better off, but you would be constantly looking over your shoulder, worrying about who was trying to kill you, who's trying to backstab you, who's trying to betray you, who is, how you would, increase your chances of succeeding, improve the walls of your castle, gain more, soldiers and wealth, which is about gaining more power so that you can, have enough, in the time. So it's this kind of sick game, right? Where in the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, and most people die, right? And while you're waiting to die, you're basically constantly worrying about being hurt, worrying about committing violence, living in terror, or terrorizing the entire time, right? And people are chopping each other's heads off. People are just fighting over chickens. People are literally, there's an entire episode where people just fight over chickens and kill each other. People are dying of diseases. There's like mass, all kind of persecutions, religious persecutions, just ethnic strife, you name it, right? It's just a nightmarish Europe. It's just normal Europe, really. As I believe Sarkozy said, a leader in the 21st century of a very European country of France, he said, Africa and Asia and these other places. He actually is a French politician. He actually said Europe is unbelievably violent and barbaric. Actually, we are the worst of even in the 20th century. We've committed the most heinous acts. This is an incredibly violent place. And so that's why I, sometimes occasionally they say the truth out loud, which is that it is a very violent place with very violent culture, and that's what happens in Game of Thrones. And you really see that come out. And I was watching a lot of Game of Thrones and Blade Runner, because Neofeud is of course also cyberpunk. It has it's kind of a fusion of alternate world, Shadow and Bone, Game of Thrones, kind of nightmarish reality of historical Euro feudal culture, right? Like I was just talking about, plus cyberpunk, which is its own kind of hellscape, high tech, low life, cyborg arms and robots and lots of poverty and people trying to survive. Like Cyberpunk Edge Runners and Cyberpunk 2077 is a popular show based on that genre, but I would argue that actually Cyberpunk is just it is in some senses it's just neo-feudalism. It's neo-Euroism, in that sense, right? It's Game of Thrones. It's most people live nasty, brutish, short lives, but instead of swords and fighting over chickens, right? You have retractable, Ono Sendai Cyberspace 7 decks, retractable cyber arms that have Gatling guns, and you're fighting over, krill paste and soy men noodles or whatever sci-fi food you're eating, right? Textured soy protein in Deus Ex, but it's actually very similar. It's actually Cyberpunk is just kind of it's a game. It is Game of Thrones in the future, right? And then there's corporate families, as I mentioned in one of the previous videos. I believe it was about Pretty in Pink, and so corporate families replace royal families. I think that was one of the points in a completely different video, but related. Where the hell did I put it? Pretty in Pink, which deals with that's just 1980s present culture, where you have extremely wealthy families on the nice side of the Detroit railroad tracks, and then you have Harry Dean Stanton's Rust Belt necropolis, broke modern peasant families on the other side of the train tracks. So, but long story short, so I would argue that actually like that was a kind of a major part of Neofeud, which is kind of like drawing um the similarity. It's not kind of like what if, in some senses, like Neofeud is not really a game about what if this barbaric, very exploitative and just terrible feudal system, right, were transplanted into the future. It's really just about how the Euro past is the Euro future, and the feudal Euro past is the capitalist Euro settler future of the United States. Because it is a Euro set, like the United States, the territory was very different at one point before the Europeans arrived, right? The differences between peoples, the destruction of the environment, many things were different before, and then they arrived, and then things got different. Let's say when they arrived in Hawaii, where I'm from, things changed, and not necessarily for the better, despite what they would like to, despite what the people from the west end of the Eurasian continent would like to suggest. Things did not get better, in fact. But back to Shadow and Bone. So that's kind of like a preface for this. So Shadow and Bone, like Game of Thrones, is a show that deals with as I said, a historical alternate past. With it's kind of an alternate Earth, because like some of this alternate past, and in other ways, it could just be a completely new Earth with, Russian characteristics. It's not necessarily, it's not really clear. Like there's many shows like this nowadays, but it definitely deals with, and it was stated by the creators of the show that the show is explicitly borrowing from 1800s Russia, right? 1800s Russian history and experiences and reality during the Tsarist era, which would also be during the, from another, in a global sense, this is the colonial era, right? Obviously, the height of the British Empire would have been in that time, right? When the sun didn't set. So Tsarpunk, Eurasian struggle, connecting the world, island. Okay, so let me just get some of this background here. Okay, so this is some of the. This is just like an article about it. The new Netflix series. So this actually is season 2 just came out, I think, recently. Holly and I are getting back to. Holly's rewatching and I'm watching for the first time season 1. There's actually Neofeud 1 was actually written while Holly and we were watching Game of Thrones while I was writing Neofeud as well. The true historical events that inspired Shadow and Bone, the new Netflix fantasy series, is based on best-selling novels, but some real-life moments were key as well. What were they? So, anyone anticipating the debut will tell you the series is based on a series of novels by the best-selling writer Leigh Bardugo, who is Israeli and Jewish, but is Russian Jewish, in fact, on one side of her family. So there's some actual ancestral hearkening, in that direction. Unless I misread the bio. But anyways, those books are a collection of novels in the Grisha verse that tells the story of Alina Starkov. So right off the bat, I'm like listening to the names. I mean, I didn't know much about the series before we started watching the show, and the names are immediately like this just sounds like Russia. It looks like Russia. Like they're the kinds of clothing and the hats and the kind of weather, which is Russia, of course, is a very Arctic country. Right? They have very derogatory names, right? The West Asians have the Occident have very derogatory names sometimes, for them, and it's a snow, and then it's another word that they use for as a derogatory term for African peoples, right? And so, and that comes up. The racism does come up. The anti-Russian and anti-Orient, right? Anti-Asian aspects do play in the show. But anyway, right off the bat, you hear there's like Alina Starkov. That sounds like a Russian name. And then there is an orphan in the fictional kingdom of Ravka who discovers she has a supernatural ability that could change the course of her world. It's a cloak and dagger universe populated by unforgettable characters, spies, thieves, mystics, and kings. While it all comes from Bardugo, the creator's imagination, there are important moments, and then that are reasons why they seem stranger than fiction, because they are based on real world events. So the Russian connection. So based on the novels by Leon Bardugo. So this is some of the main. That's Ben Barnes. He was Prince Caspian in the more recent Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe movies. And you can definitely see the feudal aspects like in the show already. There are definite differences. Like Ben Barnes is one of these people that is playing a. I haven't even seen him yet, but I can already guess. He is not. He's playing one of the upper echelons of society, right? And there are definitely, you can see visually they have very different clothing. The nobles, aristocrats, right? The feudal upper crust look distinctively different, and they have distinctively different positions, right? In their society. So you definitely have that going on. So there's the class thing going on. There's in the similar way to Game of Thrones, and Neofeud as well. Shadow and Bone, the new Netflix series, is based on novels by Leigh Bardugo. The Shadow and Bone's kingdom of Ravka is built entirely in Bardugo's imagination, but that doesn't mean it's inspired by moments. It wasn't inspired by moments in a non-fictional world. So there's very specific pieces of research that alter the course of the books. So Tsarist Russia in the mid 1800s. So that's, as I said, it was admitted that that's where a lot of inspiration comes from. Some of that was simply it synced up with the themes that were already in my head. So failure to industrialize, big divide between rich and poor, army of young conscripts. That's Tsarist Russia, and then that's also the history of the United States. So U.S. deindustrializing itself, all of its rail just smashing up its environment, and all of its factories closing down. Big divide between rich and poor. Three guys own almost everything in the United States. An army of young conscripts, the U.S. military just trying to get everyone to sign up, throwing cat girls and e-chicks into everybody's Discord and Twitch channels, recommendations to get them to sign up to go fight some ridiculous proxy imperialist war. Sounds very American, actually. No, I'm just kidding. But I'm not kidding, actually. That's literally what's happening in the United States. But back to the story. Two characters who are orphans in the first version, in the Finnish version, had parents. I didn't want to repeat the orphan trope. When Napoleon attacked before this, Russia was all about France, and aristocrats were just heavily invested in being as French as possible. Napoleon attacked, and all of a sudden, that fell out of fashion. Many of the noblemen just went and hid in their country homes, but many chose to serve, and they were served on the front side by side with the serfs. So already, right, like I said, so like Neofeud, the feudalism is always baked in there. There's this kind of another thing I wanted to do, as I'd like to bring up with Neofeud, is to draw to distinction that draw into the forefront, into the foreground, the fact that feudalism and capitalism, these are discussed as very distinctive systems in Western, certainly Anglo-Saxon, and I would suppose Franco and Spanish understandings of reality and history. But I would argue they're much less different, and neither have ever actually ended in the ways that they are described, because the transition from feudalism to capitalism is viewed as progress, right? It's certainly the way the United States and Europe describe their stories, right? The modern capitalist democracies, right? As opposed to those backward authoritarian, dictatorship, other things, right? That we're supposed to be fighting and signing up for the U.S. military to go fight. And the progress is, no, we had this feudalism, but now we're all fixed now, and we have this capitalism, and it's so much different and better. And there certainly aren't families of a tiny minority of people that control entire world events, world economies, and your entire political and economic systems. It certainly is not the case. No, it's And so that's why Neofeud is there are characters who are described as CEO/King Warren Clinton Bush, Gates, General slash CEO Walker Koch Jobs of the literal military industrial complex. That's a floating 2-mile wide building. Like DC, just disconnected from reality, just floating above the earth as everything falls apart, right? Just kind of like America right now. Right? It's spending 50 times your budget on bombs and guns and aircraft that don't work, right? While all your roads and your bridges and your population are all dying from COVID-25, 25th reinfection, and starvation, etc. So Neofeud is saying like these are not really different systems, but also there's political intrigue, and everybody can get intrigued about who Taylor Swift is dating right now, while everybody starves, just kind of like what they did in feudalism. Many of the noblemen just went and hid in their country homes. So back to Russia though. So in Russia, it was all about France, and then the aristocrats were heavily invested in being as French as possible. It's actually a very interesting point because now all of Russia is not necessarily obsessed with Europe. I think. I mean, I'm not a Russian history expert, but Russia is a very large place, and it is a place that has changed over time and space. There's a recent video on the Brian Berlek channel, New Atlas, that has Danny Haifong, it's Carl Jha and Mark Sloboda. So there's Chinese and Russian people discussing the history of Russia and China, which mostly between them, but it's they have a very different version, right? Europeans have their own kind of version of Russia's history, which is mostly about Western, the Moscow area of Russia. But there's a lot of space out there. Now, yes, a lot of the power historically has centered more on the west end of Russia, but most of Russia is more Asian than it is European, in the sense that NATO members consider European. That's why they always have articles about these they have this hyper-oriental, very racistly orientalized pictures of Putin and just any Russians generally, and they're like this horde of orcs that are coming to destroy the garden, as Mr. Borrell, the one of the foreign specialists for the European Union, I'm going to just say a really overtly racist colonialist character, like old school colonialist character. He talks about the rest of the world as the jungle that Europe has to go out into and civilize. And so yes, they're the Eastern. Anyway, so kind of getting back to the story. So the French, Russia was about France at one point, and aristocrats, and then Napoleon attacked. All of a sudden, that fell out of fashion. Many of the noblemen, Napoleon was famously defeated by the classic Russian tactic, which is you come into Russia, Russians retreat, right? Russians know how to survive in the cold. Like they live for the snow. And then they also have huge amounts of space. They retreated. Napoleon advanced with his French imperial armies. Russians, slashed, burned areas, retreated. Napoleon's and his army kept on, moving inwards and then dying. It is the European kind of they have this. Europeans also have a very strong sense of territoriality, and like, I take this territory, my territory, now it's mine. I build a castle on it, and I'm holding this territory. And it's historically it's in the mentality, right? Whereas the Russians don't look at necessarily just at what the physical territory is there. It's kind of like, how many of your militarized forces do you have? Where are your supplies coming from? How are you going to get those? Now, Europeans actually kind of like, they do think about that now, but it's kind of like, but they're not really thinking about that now because they're losing to Russia. Because Russians don't care. Russians don't care about Kharkiv or this Kiev or just this city. What's the latest one in the current war in Ukraine, right? That the U.S. started with its proxy imperialist Nazi U.S.-backed Nazi coup. Right? They don't care about just this area of Donbass right now. This area, there's a city. They create cauldrons so that the Europeans will send all of their weapons and all of their guns and all of their Nazis, right, who are sig heiling next to TERFs in Australia, and the police are just standing watching the Nazis and the TERFs have a big party and beat up random people, especially LGBTQ plus people, right? So the West is all Nazi, right? So that's very important to remember in history of Russia as well. And even before the Nazis, there were Occidental supremacists. Let's just say that. I'm not talking about insurance companies or car companies. I'm talking about the West end of Eurasia. Let's say. So Napoleon came through and lost in a similar way to the United States, and the Europeans and all of the U.S. allies are losing now, which is that they think that I'm in this area of, I am on this geographical territory now, and that means I won. No, you're in Kharkiv now. Let me just look it up. What is the New York Times BSing about today? I don't even know, right? Russia war. It's okay. We'll get to that. We're gonna get to that. They just lost the latest city. I can't even remember the name of it. You can go watch like Danny or Brian's channel for that. They're losing like 10 times more people and weapons to the U.S. and the West are and NATO to Russia every day. So it's pathetic. But so the point is that by advancing, you think that you're taking territory, and this is part of the Eurasian struggle. Part of it is their struggle, and I'm not saying like everything that Russia's ever done is perfect. Like obviously the Tsars, Russia had major problems, right? But there has been struggle between the West pushing in the European portions of the Eurasian landmass, and the world island is sometimes referred to as that entire territory, all of Asia plus Africa, but which is the majority of the world's resources and population, right? And so the European end is pushing into Russia, and a lot of times mistakenly believing that they can like take and hold the entirety of Russia, right? Mistakenly, hey, what's up, Big Teal? Also, yeah, they talk about embracing fantasy. Exactly, right? This is a fantasy show for and there's also fantasy football players playing fantasy war scenarios in their head. It's called the entire West right now. But the point is that so by believing that you take territory, right? This is kind of a side point in a military geo strategy plane, but by believing that you have taken territory and are holding a territory because you are physically there now, right? It's very short-sighted. You know what I'm saying? Right? Going like, I am in Hawaii now, so I own it now, and it's awesome. This is my Hawaii. I mean, how long is the United States military going to be here? After they poison multiple water supplies, they're dropping bombs. All of the even the local businesses are like, I don't know if we can like stand the United States. I don't know if we're gonna have anything, tourism or military or real estate, if all of the aquifers are full of jet fuel and PFAS. You know what I'm saying? Like fun fact, if you come to Hawaii, you get ready to drink 10,000 times above the EPA toxic limit. 10,000 times in regions of Hawaii. It's already been found. So the U.S. thinks that it has, like, U.S. is a the United States is an Occidental, right? It is a Western Euro culture, right? That has kind of expanded like a tumor's growth from Europe, metastasized in Turtle Island, and then it's come to Hawaii. And so it like Napoleon, right? The U.S. thinks in a very as Borrell says, in the garden mentality. It's a very NATO mentality. It's a very Euro mentality, which is to say, like, I'm in Russia now. I'm Napoleon, and me and the French troops, we have a French flag, and we're eating French bread in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, and so now Russia belongs to France, right? Even Catherine the Great. There's a lot of people that were like, the Europeans were like, we're gonna take this entire thing. All of this people and all of Russia belongs to Europe now. European ways, right? Catherine the Great. Catherine the Great was a very, Eurocentric figure as well. And so now we have it all. But do you have it all, or are you currently in a position of power to extract resources and labor and lord it over this huge landmass, the world's the largest landmass by as a country by acreage, right? Second is, I believe, Canada. Now a lot of it's very cold and it's not inhabited. So the population wise, China is bigger. China and India are both bigger than Russia, but landmass wise, it's very large. And you think that you can because you have somebody in power inside of the territory that is a European, right? Or because Napoleon is now inside of a portion of the Russian territory and advancing. You see, think of it in the mind of Napoleon, right? In the mind of Napoleon, he was winning because he was moving in and he's taking territory, right? We have several hundred square miles of, or 1,000 square miles of Russian territory. We're annexing this. We're bringing this into the French Empire. Oh, this is amazing. We're doing so well. Our French soldiers are quartered in all of these Russian towns. Meanwhile, the Russians are looking at this and they're going, this is not good. And we're not happy with this. However, I don't believe that these French so-called great military, these European military strategists are quite as, competent as they believe that they are. Because do they not know that winter is coming? And don't they also know that, where are you going to get your supplies? How are you going to maintain that territory when you are all freezing to death and starving? We have all of the winterized clothing, knowledge, history. We have our own food supply chains. How are your supply chains going, by the way, in the United States? With your $20 eggs and your $50, how's Europe? How's your supply chains going with your Norway, U.S. Detonation of your Nord Stream pipeline? How's it going? You see, it's a very European conundrum that you've fallen into. It's a very Eurasian historic struggle. It's actually a repeating of history, which is like short-term thinking. Oh, a handful of us, people being paid off by the U.S. military and U.S. capitalists in France, Spain, and Brussels, especially. We're gonna do very well, right? We're gonna do very well. Look! We're fighting Russia because we're throwing bombs and tanks into Ukraine. We're winning, right? We're winning, right? And now what? What about your supplies? Now the winter comes. It's funny because the Russians were laughing at the Europeans. The Russians were laughing in March. They're like, don't you idiots realize when you sanction us, when you weaponize your dollars, when you cut all trade off, when the Germans and the Austrians are chopping off the pipelines, you're shooting yourself in your foot. This is like Napoleon invading France. Like, what do you think you've won because you've banned Dostoevsky from the bookshelves? And not just in Florida, all over the West? You think you've won because you've turned vodka into freedom? Instead of a white Russian, it's a white freedom drink. You think you've won? But that is the history of Europe, though. You see, that is the history of Western neo-feudal and feudal colonial capitalist thinking, or just it's very short-sighted. It's like, we've won because we planted our flags everywhere. For how long? For how long? We've won because we forced these people to accept this currency for now. How long are they going to accept the dollars? De-dollarization is happening rapidly. Right? But what you see, and so Napoleon thought I won because I was in Russia and me and my troops were in Russia for how long? Right? Alexander. Let's go back further. Alexander. And I have a whole fucking video about that one as well. Alexander the Great, the Hellenic, 2,000-year-old Western, self-described by the European and Anglo-Saxon certainly as the predecessor, the prototype of the West, the Greek Empire. Alexander, how long did he last in Asia when he expanded that way? Right, he rapidly Yeah, I have a whole video about that. He rapidly went into Babylon, right? He conquered large parts of, what's kind of like Afghanistan. Well, we can, I forget the exact country equivalent today, but large swaths of that region. But how long did that last, right? And he's like, now we have brought civilization. Now we've civilized the jungle, right? But how long did it last? The answer is not very long. Less than I think it was like it's certainly less than 20 years. I forget the exact amount. Now, yeah, some things did last in terms of certain buildings, Alexandria's, etc. And that's fine. But the idea that like we've taken this territory because we've been here, right? It's very short-sighted. It's very limited. And also, the Greeks had a financial oligarchy backed by a sexist, racist, anti-Afro, Hellenic Westerners owning Afro-Asiatic peoples as slaves. That was the Greek reality. So it's very feudal. It's very feudal and capitalist and colonial, just like 1800s France was. They cut heads off royalty, and now they have the richest man in the world, the CEO of Louis Vuitton. In fact, France is if France actually was no longer feudal, I would argue, they wouldn't be calling for decapitation of a particular person who is current. He starts with an M, and it rhymes with Akron. You know what I'm saying? If France actually ended feudalism, they wouldn't have the richest person in the entire planet, as well as such levels of upset. See, like it's what people are saying. Like, there are all these protests in France. Why aren't people like calling for the ending and why isn't the entire West and U.S. calling for sanctions against France, right? But when Chinese or Iranians protest, it's, oh my God, we gotta cut them off and we gotta stop working with them. But the thing is, France is having, like, in terms of total numbers, bigger protests. So either one, the protests are just the French getting out and just playing games with each other, or number two, you have illegitimate regimes all over Europe, especially France. But the reality is, it's both, actually, really, because the militarized police massacre. They have far more well-armed military in the U.S. that kill black people, Black Lives Matter activists, Stop Cop City activists. So in France, they play patty cake, the police, compared to the United States. Like French police against white Frenchmen, right? It's nothing compared to the U.S. police, and most European police is like that. Now, if it's French and Europeans against black and Asians, then it's, Muslims, then it's different. But so in the one sense, it's bullshit. In another sense, the French regime is unjust, because why do you have a multi-hundred billionaires in Paris, right? And nobody asked for the pension to be raised. So either France and Macron just forced it through. So either Western democracy doesn't exist, right? Because just as a counter example, China, there were protests against the zero COVID policies, and then shortly thereafter, in China, right, nowhere near the scale of the French protests. Shortly thereafter, the Chinese government just responded and changed the policies, right? So by any definition of democracy, China is more democratic than France. Now France likes to burn shit and go on strike, and that's fine. And I'm not joining unions and having empowered workers that are organized and conscious. I wish they were more anti-racist conscious, and I wish that there weren't huge fascists all over France, and I wish the France working class was more solidarity with the global colonized people, like in Africa, but they don't have that. The French working class have a narrow class consciousness for themselves, and that's it. It's very strong. They come out and strike, but it's not for the world. It's not at the level of solidarity that Black Lives Matter, Palestinian, indigenous, and black-led left movements inside imperial core countries have, and certainly is nothing like what the African and Asian left formations have. The French consciousness is like, we want to keep our low pension age. And that's fine. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's like, after we get our pension age, as long as we get our retirement age at 63, we're going home. That's it, right? And so there's a lot of things going on there, right? But that's another sense that France is still feudal, and it's also still it's also still short-sighted, you know, because in the long term, what you're gonna leave the billionaire? I mean, if you really want to go hard, why don't you get rid of all your billionaires and capitalism? But the reality is the French working class don't give a shit. In fact, they kind of like imperialism. You know, that's why France's left formations gave the middle finger to Ho Chi Minh when the Vietnamese came to France and said, why don't you organize with us to end global capitalism? The French said, we don't care. We just want a cut of the empire. And so we'll come out and burn some shit in the street and let the trash stink up the street until we get our cut of global capitalism. But we don't really care about ending global capitalism. It's very reactionary, actually. Amazingly racist in France. So it's kind of like, it's good, but it has to improve. So I think that France, the short-sightedness of even the French working class will prove to be short-sighted in the sense of the Napoleonic era. Both Napoleon as well as a lot of the people that fought for him, unfortunately are going to have to hit some harder realities, because Europe as a whole is not going to be able. There's not, part of the reason why things are getting more intense there is because they're unable. The colonies, right? The African colonies like Senegal, right? All of West Africa, right? 1/3 of all Eiffel Tower lights and French, Parisian, and all of France house light bulbs. All your incandescent and CFL light bulbs in France, 1/3 of them are lit by the uranium coming out of one African country. It might have changed because a lot of Africa is throwing off their colonizer shackles. Macron is going down there. The thing is, Macron is going down there and doing the French working classes bidding for them, right? He's over there lecturing African countries, trying to get them military coup and invaded, right? And then the African leaders are telling Macron, "Fuck you, we're not gonna do business with you, colonizer, rip off artist ass anymore." And so now inside of France, it's getting tighter because there's not as much, it's internal inequalities, right? But the local French, the white French average person is doing far better than the average African, and the French elite have bought off their compliance, like most of Europe, the SOCDEM countries, with white Euro solidarity for the last century, basically, or more, and certainly since post-World War II era. And so the bigger fights happening in France is because there's not enough to go around to buy off your white racist masses anymore. So that's going to be, I don't know how that's going to pan out, Same thing for the United States, right? The United States, in the United States, even just working class, any kind of consciousness is a lot lower than a place like France. But even still, there's the level that people are having to put up with is dropping even below the point in which the incredibly willing to suffer, apparently, American citizen is willing to tolerate. It's getting very intense. It's getting more intense in the United States. But yeah, exactly, big deal. Macron had the nerves to step on the continent. So, but anyways, we're not talking about that. So let's get back to the topic. So back to Shadow and Bone, though. So as I was researching, Bardugo explains that when I was researching, I learned that when Napoleon attacked, before this Russia was all about France, aristocrats were heavily invested in being as French as possible, as I brought up, and then it fell out of fashion. But that's the short-term thinking, right? Which is that, well, I've already gone off on that several times. Many of the noblemen just went and hid in their country homes, but many chose to serve, and they served on the front side by side with their serfs. This was a sort of a revelatory moment for many of them, spending the long nights in the siege with people who they hadn't even considered people before. So, this is actually a difference, I would argue, between France, Britain, the United States, and Russia, which is the level of, not to say that that suddenly the former wealthy lords of the nobles of Russia suddenly became communists, and they're all there for equality in Russia, and they're all equal brothers in this fight against the invading French armies. But it does have that was a moment, right? And there are moments like that kind of in Vietnam. Like there's similarities to Vietnam, where you had like even Luna was one of our friends. Luna Oi is Vietnamese. Luna Oi is a Vietnamese comrade of ours and friend of ours and content creator. And Luna's grandpa, right, was actually a wealthy. It's Vietnamese feudal, so it's different from the Euro feudalism, but it certainly were a more wealthy, powerful family, and this is also cannot be separated from the intervention of the French colonialists in Vietnam. So that also is a factor, and so Europeans propped up whatever existing, to whatever level there were inequalities in society, historically, culturally, in any part of the world, Asia, Africa, Turtle Island, Pacific. They would push those up, prop those up, like caste, the way that the British like put the caste system in India on steroids, right? And then, you really should be really, have really great inequalities, and we'll pay your wealthiest, most powerful, complicit local governors, right? So duplicitous Indian families that want to work with the British will give you a cut of the colonial wealth and keep all of your Indian people enslaved and impoverished and exploited, right? And so similarly in Vietnam, the French worked with the Vietnamese families that they could, if they could, to say, okay, well, we'll give you extra. All you got to do is, it's kind of like Obama, right? We'll give the one black man millions of dollars and major book deals, right? And lots of fame and power. And all the other black people, in return for, making it look like America's not racist, and all the other black people can get screwed, and they can be 10 times poorer than the average American white family, right? So Vietnam, Luna's grandpa was one of the collaborators, or as far as I understand it, was one of feudal family. And then after the revolution, Luna's grandpa lost his entire wealth in his shirt, and so and a lot of that was about fighting back against Occidental invading forces, not unlike Russia, right? And Vietnam, actually, it's the Soviet Union. So Russia directly helped. And Luna just just quick shout out. Luna recently just finished the translation of Vietnam Dialectical Materialism curriculum that is now available for pre-order. So if you actually want to get some actual education, you read this book, you get more education than any Western K-12 education with just one book. Okay, so I recommend you get this book. I'm not even joking, because they don't even teach this in school. They don't teach anything that's important like history, economics, sociology, and the true history of the world. They don't teach that in the West. So that's part of why they're so short-sighted, because you don't learn actual history. You are doomed, as a Jewish guy somewhere in Europe happened to say, you're doomed to repeat your mistakes, and so they repeat them all the time. So. But anyways, so in Vietnam though, the local collaborators with the local wealthier families that did better under a colonial regime, right? And historically they had their own, they had their own system that was. It's important at this point. It's not necessarily European feudalism, because that's a different regime. Hawaii had its own kind of systems of management that were called feudalism, but they're certainly not equal to European feudalism, in the sense that because the level of equality and the level of material needs being met by the population makes it very different. And that's an important distinction, because it's easy to just conflate all of the world is just like Europe. And if you didn't have communism and socialism, you must have had feudalism or you had capitalism. And this is Eurocentric political and social thing. Anyways, but a point I want to get to is that the Soviet Union, so Russians actually helped Vietnam to be liberated. So the PT-76, I made a game about this called, the Vietnamese fighting off capitalist colonizers. I made a game about the Vietnamese, like the Russians that Shadow and Bone is based on, fighting off Occidental Western invading forces, right? And so decolonizers there's a tank. This tank is a Russian tank. It is a PT-76 Soviet tank that was historically used in the war, fought with Russian weapons against the United States, and they also were fought against France. But this one is taking place mostly against the era in which the Vietnamese are primarily fighting the United States, which who wanted to recolonize Vietnam and stop spread of communism and socialism. So, but why does that matter? But no, that actually does matter, because the people, like, part of the reason why the Soviet Union, right? Part of it's not just the reason, but a important factor into why the Soviet Union became the first place to have an entire large countrywide, not the first, because Hawaii was already socialist way before that, but the first, let's say, Eurasian continent, very large country, to have some kind of Marxist, socialist, communist revolution, is in part because I would argue a lot of that has to do with the fact that most of Russia is not considered European, not by their own. There's many different ethnic regions, right? You go all the way to East Russia, they speak a different language, but they look basically Chinese, right? You have lots of different ethnicities, different languages, wholly different cultures, right? That interactions, but they're like, it's like an entire continent it's like an entire Europe's worth of difference of different peoples. Like Europe has Germans, and they have French, and they have Spanish, etc., etc. And so Russia is like an entire European Union. It's bigger than European Union worth of different peoples inside of it, in the Russian Federation, right? And so those people mostly consider themselves like in Asia. They're more closely tied to the rest of Asia than to these Europeans. And number two, the Europeans considered all of that area to be the Orient. It was the barbarian world. It was orcs. It was Asian, yellow peril. That was yellow peril. Everything east of Germany, right? Sometimes East Germany was not even considered Western. East Germany was orcs, for in periods of time. Certainly Britain and France, they looked at that as that was evil over there. We have to clean the jungle up in East Germany. So anyway, but you see what I'm trying to say, which is that Russia has some similarities to Vietnam in that sense, in that as a people, ethnically, culturally, in the race is a very fraudulent Western science. The West is ascientific, but it's a very of course falsely constructed conception of humanity and being and biology, like turf ideology, which is all right, which is about maintaining power and inequality, right? By breaking humanity up into these races that are genetically DNA based and they're immutable. The African race, Asian races that are fallen, African and Asian are fallen. The Caucasian, the Anglo-Teutonic, these are the best races, right? Anyway, so the Russian and the Vietnamese had that experience with the French. The French viewed the Vietnamese, like the Europeans viewed the Russians, as subhuman, right? They call them snow N-words. That's what they call the Russians at periods of time. And the Vietnamese were viewed as lesser people. They're Oriental, East. They're not European. They're Asian. Like Eurasia is a landmass, but the continent of Europe is really just it is a racist construction by the West. It's just, the landmass is no, in terms of the physical ocean and lands, what parts of the earth are exposed by water, from the water and not. There's no actual geographical delineation. It's all racist. It's all culture and human psychology, sociology based, right? So anyway, so the Russian experience and the Vietnamese experience are all very similar, and so that I argue is a part of why Vietnam and Russia are two countries that have very strong socialist, communist, left histories, in that they were attacked and they were subjugated, as in not like parts of their country had some wealth and other ones didn't. They did have that problem too. Like there was Tsarist Russia, there were feudal elements, right? There were like unequal elements in Vietnam prior to the French arriving, you know, which I don't want to speak too much to, because I don't want to, give Colin, oh, you see, Vietnam was bad and everyone's bad, and that's why it's okay for, the U.S. and the West to have capitalism and colonialism, because everyone just was killing each other. No, like there were problems, but then the French made everything worse, and Russia was not a perfect place. But then Euro invasions didn't help, and feudal capitalist colonialist attitudes did not help, right? And so those histories of Russia and Vietnam and China as well, their histories are actually more interlinked than as a whole than Russia is to Britain, really, when you think of it that way, or Russia or China is to Japan, even, right? Because Japan and China, they have some similarities, but one of the major differences was during the colonial era, Japan joined the world imperial powers, right? And Japan was a major imperial power. Now, yeah, of course, like Russia did have its imperial aspects, right? But it a lot of the imperial, let's say, will, and a lot of the imperial force was coming out of the most Euroized portions of Russia, right? And that's part of why the pushback was, the people did not necessarily want to continue, because of their own unique history, and also because like the people governing out of Moscow, people governing out of Catherine the Great, like they looked at themselves as above. The Tsarists looked at themselves, as above a lot of the other people, especially in the 1800s, above those people below them. That's part of Shadow and Bone, right? So so you have the external force attacking the West, coming and attacking Russia as a whole, and then internally you do have these inequalities. But the external force really serves to make it really arouses revolutionary forces inside the country, right? In the same way that like the French external colonizer, right? Now there's inequality in Vietnam, but the external French colonizer coming in, right? Just amazingly, let me see if I can get a picture of that. Like Luna has lots of information about this, right? When the French, coming in, and shoot, I can't find it. That was Jane Fonda, in Vietnam, siding with the Vietnamese communists. But anyways, that's me. But anyways, I can't find a picture right now. I should probably stop track. But anyway, you can go look at Luna's social media and find all the pictures of what actually happened in France. Luna has lots of sharing of my tweets, but so during the French colonial era, things got incredibly terrible. I mean, you had people who were the children were just starving to death. I mean, like where colonization happened everywhere. The French just taking pictures of the dead bodies that they hunted down, children emaciated and bone. There's like videos of like children. Let me see if there's a video of French woman throwing to Vietnamese. There's a video of the French, this one, where you have this is like, it kind of sums up in a picture this history, where the French white lady is throwing like coins or seed on the ground, and it's like bone thin. Speaking of Shadow and Bone, these like bone thin Vietnamese children are then just scrambling around trying to pick up coins. Yeah, you see this one? And all the French women are just like laughing. Look at these little children, right? The children are picking up the coins because they have not enough to eat. They have not enough of their basic needs being met, and the French are just like mocking them. They're just like mocking them, like, look at these little animals scrambling around like little insects. Look, they're like little cockroaches. Look at these little cockroaches running around the ground. So this is that is another, and the French were an external force again, right? Like the French were an external force coming into Russia with Napoleon. And they're an external force inside of Vietnam, right? Like the United States is an external force in Hawaii. The thing is, in the United States, the Euros have evolved more advanced methods of maintaining their illegitimate, abusive, exploitative colonial occupations. Right? It's called brainwashing everybody to love you. That the Anglo-Saxons began to pivot in a way that the French didn't. French still kind of act this way when they go to other countries. Still in Africa, Macron is one of the worst. The French just show up and they just lecture you and they go, "You are backwards little black people, and you should give us all your resources and all of your control of your government because you're just black, and that's bad." That's basically what Macron was kind of saying. I mean, he didn't say it exactly that way, but he's been implying that. Germany, whenever the Americans figured some of these things out. Like the Americans are a little more advanced. Part of it is because they have so many now people inside of their backyard, and part of it is they have different history. But the Americans learned better, like more advanced ways to maintain empire, to maintain illegitimate exploitation and control of other peoples. The Europeans are way behind. That's why they've all fallen behind. And America is using Europe as a giant fist against Russia, beating and then to the suffering of all the Europeans, and the Europeans can't figure this shit out. But this was the reality. So when you have an invading force coming into an area, right, subjugating the people, that's not they're not of as an entire culture, and they create their own thing called race. The French are a race that is better than superior to the Vietnamese, which is a sub race of the Asian race. All the Asian races are inferior to the European races, right? And so when you create this, when you have these invading forces that have clear delineations, right? That's the difference. So you see, the French occupation of Vietnam at that time, or the British occupation of, I don't know, India or lots of other places, is different from the U.S. occupation of, let's say, Hawaii, or the U.S. occupations of Puerto Rico, etc. In the sense that they try to legitimize themselves more, especially post World War II. Well, we're here because we love you and we're all one happy family. It's more American. The Europeans, they have sharper lines there, They still have like they all dress up. White people do blackface they do Black Pete in European countries, and everybody's like, "Oh, this is totally normal." They just say the N-word in Finland like it's totally normal and fine. Because, well, I mean, what else are we supposed to call it? It's literally what they say in daycares in Finland. What are we supposed to call the black children? We just call them N-words. The Americans are like, well, maybe you shouldn't do that. It was very clear in the Ukraine war when it started. All the Europeans were saying, well, obviously, this is a savage. These are all savages, and the black people in Ukraine should just stay there because they're all backwards. And the Americans were like, oh, maybe we shouldn't, and that's why the Europeans call it la wokeism, right? But it's kind of the Americans are just trying to, not that because American powers care about black people or brown people, but they're better at maintaining shadow racist, imperialist, colonialist, capitalist power while masking it with this kind of false face of friendliness, also known as the Democratic Party and liberals and NGOs and all this bullshit, and putting on a kente cloth. But the Europeans, they never really figured that out, the Europeans still in Europe, I should say. They never really got to that point. So, French women throw coins at children in Indochina 1900. So, but the point is that but when you have this invading force, right, then the people inside that country, the level. So you have multiple things, right? You have the inequality within the society, but then you have all of the people of all, whether they are working class, they're average wealth, or they are very rich. They suddenly have another motivating force that is to stop these invaders. You know what I'm saying? And
it is very galvanizing. Like I watched this happen actually even in Hawaii, right? On Mauna Kea, like just a quick. I know I'm a lot of asides in. I know, but in Hawaii there was an invading force on Mauna Kea, our sacred one event, right, where the United States, illegally. Well, the U.S. is constantly illegally occupying our sovereign country of Hawaii. But let me see if I can find that. And so on Mauna Kea, this is about Neofeud, of course, but yeah. So on Mauna Kea, the United States was mass arresting. Shit. No, wait, that's not this. I'm in the wrong thread. Yeah. Sorry. This is my Mauna Kea trash thread, but that's not that one. It's down. Yeah, here. So, again, an important thing to remember, Hawaii, of course, was advanced and industrialized during the 1800s, when this period that we're talking about. So Russia was not the first country to actually practice socialism in a lot of the senses that we mean that term. But even prior to the United States, here. Well, this is the one I want. The TMT. This was an event where the United States deployed thousands of military and police against Native Hawaiians. So this is a Native Hawaiian being arrested here in Hawaii. The governor of Hawaii, the U.S. illegal fake state of Hawaii governor, actually said Hawaiians don't care about their sacred mountain. Hawaiians are spilling drug. They're urinating and defecating all over their so-called sacred mountain. His former governor David Ige. His lieutenant governor is now Governor Josh Green. Well, they're all fake governors of the illegitimate occupation. The U.S. is an invasionary force in Hawaii. I mean, I know the fact that most people don't realize that is testament to the efficacy of the U.S. method of imperial colonial power. You know what I'm saying? Most people don't know. Even Hawaiians, a lot of them don't know. So, a lot of us don't know. But this was a galvanizing movement. This is like the French throwing the coins to the children. This is like Napoleon showing up and tearing down all of the Russianness off of the houses and then just killing people. It's not the same as that. But you know what I'm saying? The United States accused Hawaiians of going, you don't care about your mountain. You're just pissing and pooping all over that mountain. The governor said the Hawaiians are using drugs. There's heroin needles. There's crack cocaine. It's a mess. And also, this whole thing is illegal, by the way. And then the United States just started mass arresting Hawaiians on a mountain that, under the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, even the U.S. law, this was a place that Hawaiians had for our indigenous own autonomy, right? And so the United States miscalculated when I don't think they realized that they couldn't keep it under wraps. The news is very important for maintaining modern imperial power. Because, right, that's what you want to do, is you want to stop the population from recognizing their occupation. Like the Russians did, like the Vietnamese did, like Kwame Ture, like leaders in Ghana, right? It had a different name at one point. Like African leaders, like South American leaders, right? Like Castro's, right? Like the people in Cuba, Venezuela, right? When they realize, oh my God, we are like actually being subjugated by an external force. The gringo colonizers, Spanish colonizers, Euro colonizers, they are putting us in these feudal serf-like terrible conditions to work on their pineapple fields for United Fruit Company, and we can't even read, and so we have to fight and we have to remove these colonial forces, right? But the consciousness that you are in a colonial situation is a thing that the most advanced colonizers try to prevent, right? If they can nowadays, right? And so this event actually galvanized so many Native Hawaiians because it was invisibilized, right? Hawaiians, like my parents, I sometimes bring up, they were forcefully diseducated by the United States and propagandized, brainwashed, conditioned to believe that they're Americans when they're not. They're actually Native Hawaiians under an illegal military occupation. But they're told America is the best place and you're going to have such an amazing deal in Hawaii. It's actually Hawaii is the most unequal place in the entire United States, which is an amazingly unequal place. The average person in the United States is worse off than the average European, right? As first world countries go. But a lot of people accept, it wasn't really up to whether they accepted the deal or not. They were not even told. They were just brainwashed into believing that they were all Americans in Hawaii. But this event highlighted the fact, right, that the United States is an invasionary force that doesn't care about Hawaiians as they watch their elderly 70-year-old grandparents being hauled off into police cars. As they watched Hawaiians watched the governor of Hawaii just denigrate and say the most horrible things about Hawaiians. As the 6 months of the United States just arresting and target anyone who flying a Hawaiian flag was being pulled over. So what happened? More Hawaiians started flying Hawaiian flags. More Hawaiians started going to Mauna Kea. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were like, we will not stand for this continued attack on our Hawaiian nation by the United States. There was a huge awakening for a lot of people. 10 to 20% of the entire population of Hawaii participated in some kind of action in this time period. A lot of people, the Oahu Protectors, I know one of the lead organizers of the Oahu Water Protectors against the U.S. military, Mikey Inoue. He runs he leads a lot of these actions because he has the time, he has the skills and the resources to do a lot of this stuff. He was radicalized on Mauna Kea. So by extension, if the United States hadn't come out and acted in such an aggressive manner to reveal the fact that there was an invasionary force in Hawaii, a colonial occupier, maybe, it's possible that 2023 there would be far less total radicalized or at least politically activated, not really radicalized, it's just becoming normally political, right? There would be far less awoken, and woke is a word that comes from African, especially African American history or Black history, that meant being aware of the racism and the exploitation and inequalities in the 20th century. I forget. There's a whole thread on that you can go read. So Hawaiians are becoming woke to the fact, and so anti-woke is just racism. That's all it is. It's just, I want to be a racist and I want to burn books with Ron DeSantis. It's just fascism. That's what anti-woke is. It's always white people using that word and sellouts of their own peoples. So Hawaiians were awoken to the fact that they're under an illegal U.S. military occupation that is hurting their people and their culture. And so then that activated new actions at Red Hill, Oahu Water Protectors, the Hawaiian, anti-imperialist, socialist, educated, pro-LGBTQ plus, because that's actual Hawaiian culture, right? Movements in Hawaii were activated by the realization that there was an external invasionary force, and I know I've gone off on this a long time, that is not unlike the force that was the invasionary force into Russia or into Vietnam or into parts of Africa or all of Africa or into India, let's say, right? There's a movie, RRR, Rise, Revolution, Revolt, right? That it's the most popular movie in 50 plus countries. The new word is the global majority, which is not white, 90% of it, right? Not European. And so in the global majority, this is a movie, RRR. It won best soundtrack, right? But around the world, this is one of the most popular films. It's an Indian Telugu language action epic film. It has a very anti-colonial story within it. And this movie is one of the most popular movies. Because you know why? Because this actually illustrates the history of India, a lot of it. And the history, not just of India, but a lot of places, including Hawaii, which is of a colonial occupation. Of who? Of a Western Occidental invasionary force, right? And in this time it was more in India in the 1800s, it was more apparent that the British were a colonial occupier, right? In Hawaii in the 21st century, it's less apparent, and then at moments it became apparent. And so people like myself, as a Native Hawaiian activist and anti-imperialist, anti-racist,
anti-capitalist. And if you're to be anti-capitalist, you have to be anti-imperialist and anti-colonialist because they're the ones who installed it in Hawaii. So when the United States screwed up, I actually would argue, if I was the governor of Hawaii and I wanted to maintain U.S. military bases to make unhinged proxy war on China and maintain global empire and global capitalism, I would not have said such racist and terrible things about Hawaiians, and I would not have arrested all these Hawaiians on Mauna Kea. I just would have stopped building TMT. You know what I'm saying? But the problem is that the West is short-sighted, and the TMT Corporation is headed by a Silicon Valley magnate, Gordon Moore, CEO of Intel, right? You know, the Moore's Law, and a bunch of a feudal, which is to say a corporate family, the Moore family, as well as Gianni Napolitano, 30 Canadian universities, the entire University of California system, University of Hawaii, which is a colonial imperial university that makes millions of dollars for its administrators, beating up Hawaiians like this. They actually were behind this. So the University of Hawaii is not a place of Hawaiian learning. It's a place of imperial occupation with academic characteristics. Japan and Indian universities, right? And those universities, they had a separate interest. They had a feudal rivalry with the U.S. military and the U.S. empire generally, which is to say, the U.S. military, they need Pohakuloa, a training facility. They need Pearl Harbor. They need the Indo-Pacific Command. They don't need a fucking telescope. That's what this was, right? But the private capitalist interests of the U.S. military and Western scientific imperial interests diverged, resulting in miscalculations like mass arrests of Hawaiians, and then people like myself and other Native Hawaiian activists jumped on that. That's basically what happened. And now the United States is in a bigger... Now, it's not to say that there wouldn't be Oahu Water Protectors and the Hawaiian sovereignty and Hawaiian liberation movements and wouldn't be active now. I'm just saying that it was a major nodal point. It was activational. It was a lightning bolt that brought... There's a lot of hula, and there's paddling, and there's Hawaiian language schools. There's Punana Leo. There's Hawaii. My sister teaches Hawaiian language in a Hawaiian immersion school, right? That's about cultural, historical, and and language by extension, because Hawaiian language was banned in Hawaii by the United States. And so, all these disparate groups all kind of came together into a more solidified, activated, organized, larger Hawaiian movement, right? And even non-Hawaiian people recognized, wow, this is a real problem. Investigated and learned at the Pu'uhuluhulu University. It was a university, a free university was established on the mountain where thousands and tens of thousands of people were coming and learning. As I said, the people who are leading the charge against the U.S. empire in Hawaii and the Red Hill toxic spills, these people, a lot of them, the leading people were activated. They're not even all Hawaiian, but they were activated on Mauna Kea because they came and they realized what was happening. Because why? Because the United States revealed it fucked up its imperial game plan that was working very well. So, but I love it when the United States makes a blunder on its grand chessboard world hegemony game, especially in my own backyard. You know what I'm saying? That's really nice for me. Somebody said RRR crushes. Yeah, it does indeed. How do I have to finish watching the second half of it? It's 3 hours long, but I can already tell where it's going. But anyway, so coming back to this though, real quick. So that's where I've gone like so long on this one topic. But when Napoleon attacked, coming back to this topic, when Napoleon attacked Russia, was all of France, that changed. And so I would also like Russia's orientation to Europe as a whole was altered in many senses. And also, but that's just one time period. But it's important to remember like that history of like there's outside forces attacking us, outside forces attacking. Now, if the outside force attacking you is a capitalist, imperialist, feudalist, racist place like Europe, then the probability that you are, you have a, it already kind of puts you on the other side in a certain sense. And certainly, if you are a colonized people, you are already in a position that aligns you against colonial capitalism in a lot of senses, right? Now, of course,
You could be a colonized people that then recolonizes others. That is the thing that has happened, in some places like, again, Japan was an Asian backwards place, and then it kind of joined, right? Japan joined with Britain, France, Germany, etc., especially in the subjugation of China, which was another major Asian power that they wanted to colonize. 8 countries attacked China in the beginning of the 20th century, and so, but if you're, it's like, how does human history function, right? It's dialectical history. But if like, just as an example, where will Hawaii be in 50 years, 20, 30, 50 years, right? It depends. How badly will the United States fuck up? Will there be a United States? I don't know. They look like they're going to hit a civil war soon. Donald Trump is out there, saying, Donald Trump just came out and said the biggest threats to the United States. Now, I don't love Donald Trump. Of course, he's a racist, self-absorbed, duplicitous, fucking demagogue. But he's the most American. He's such an American character. He really does represent America, because that's what America is: selfish, racist, lying pieces of shit. So that's normal American. Donald Trump is one of the most American presidents in that sense. But Donald Trump just got Russia. He said it's. I think he said it's. Yeah, he said, I think, I forget the exact words, but he said the biggest threat to the United States is not Russia. It's ourselves. And it's who is it? It's the people who are enabling the deep state and this and that. But the fact that it's like, there's people that are actually coming out and going, it's inside the United States, that the threat is coming from. People are starting to realize that, Now, of course, they're going to the right and they're going to racist, anti-historical, like Ron DeSantis type people. But the United States is not in it is not in a position, right, going forward to really be, well maintaining any kind of empire. So that's what is the dialectical analysis of the United States? It's very murky right now. But what's similar for Hawaii, it kind of depends on what the United States does. If the United States continues to screw up, though, which it seems to want to do, it does this all the time. The fact that it keeps spilling PFAS, it just spilled more PFAS the other month. It keeps spilling toxic waste into the water. That's another lightning rod moments, right? Red Hill woke up lots of people. They're like, oh my God, I'm not going to, even as a business manager at a restaurant or a hotel, I'm not going to have a job if the United States poisons the entire water. Because tourists don't want to drink water that comes out smelling like a gas station. So that, it's every time they screw up like this, you have to jump on that. Because they, the thing about the Euro way is that, they have so many competing interests, and they're all selfish, feudal interests, right? Corporate feudal or feudal, or, right? In the sense that, as I said, scientific, imperial, corporate, Silicon Valley interests sometimes diverge from U.S. Pentagon, D.C., Brzezinski style world manager interests. D.C. and Wall Street sometimes don't always see exactly eye to eye in all branches. Like, inter corporate fights. Like, at one point, Bill Gates and Bezos, right? Microsoft and Amazon were fighting over $10 billion contracts. So when they start fighting each other, this is when a lot of the times that there's like opportunities to jump in there and weaponize that against these people. Sometimes I call it crashing Star Destroyers into each other. So, and certainly the uncontrolled, chaotic, so-called invisible hand of the capitalist market is not really capable of making long-term strategic decisions. And so when they fail to make long-term strategic decisions, like to poison their own troops at Red Hill, then you got to jump on that and go, okay, well, look at, the United States can't even manage its own, lieutenant colonel and colonel water supplies, and all their infants are dying in military bases. Look at Camp Lejeune. Now, Camp Lejeune is just yet another one of countless U.S. military failures. The U.S. military is also stealing Chinese aid in Syria because they don't have enough tents for their troops, apparently. I don't know. 1 out of 4 U.S. Before you join the U.S. military, because they're trying to recruit, as I said, they're sending e-girls and cat girls into Twitch streams, Twitter, and TikToks to try to recruit, like sexy young girls, to recruit 17, 18, 19 generation alpha kids into the U.S. military because they're not meeting their target. So good job to Gen Z and Gen Alpha for not falling hook, line, and sinker for imperial war propaganda. Join the U.S. military. But 1 out of 4 U.S. troops' families are malnourished. So whatever deal you thought you were going to get, you're not getting it anymore. You're 5 times more likely to commit suicide. Your family will starve if you want to have one. There's all these statistics. Like, even if you join the military, there was a point where you would get a pretty good economic living standard, but now it's gone. So definitely don't join. That's another major fuck up. The U.S. can't even buy its stormtroopers properly. You know what I'm saying? It can't even pay them properly. So they're all. I mean, if I was Gen Z and Gen Alpha, not that I would join the U.S. military because that's where you go to do war crimes and be a stormtrooper, and I don't want to be a evil fucking war criminal. But let's just say I was a brainwashed person. If I'm looking at that deal, I'm going like, oh, what? I could work at McDonald's and be broke, or I can work in the U.S. military and get myself killed possibly and be broke. Why would I want to do that? So, anyway, but so let's go back to so many of the noblemen just went and hid in their country homes. But so this was sort of a relative. I already did this. So when they returned from this, many of these officers freed their serfs. I found this so poignant that I went back. So actually, it's interesting that because of fights, like this is my point, because of the fights in the Eurasian struggle of the Europeans against the Asians. One way to look at Russia is it's the Asian part against it's the North Asian part against the European part of Eurasia struggling against each other, right? In the world island. And so the invasion ignited something. It actually disestablished, right? You know, people talk about how do we dismantle colonialism? How do we dismantle colonialism inside the United States? How do we dismantle capitalism? How do we dismantle racism? A lot of times, like, it does take like constant like work to get educated and organized and conscious. And then like it's like you're building, and then you have to, but then events happen, and things happen rapidly. You know, decades, nothing happens, and then in 5 seconds, everything happens. Everything, everywhere, all at once happens. I think that's a Stalin quote or a Lenin quote, or possibly it's a Silver Spoon quote, because I think I just misquoted who I was trying to quote. But you know, speaking of Russia, Lenin speaking of Russian history. So, but that is true in the sense that whether you are communist, socialist, capitalist, feudalist, or whatever you are, for periods of time, not much happens, right? Like, not much was happening in Hawaii. And then the United States said Hawaiians are a bunch of lazy bum savages, right? And the United States said, we hate Hawaiians. And then they beat up tons of Hawaiians and then beat up all their old people, beat up elderly indigenous people. And then Hawaiians said, and then all of a sudden, right, nothing happening, it's not that nothing was happening. Hundreds of thousands of young Hawaiians were getting educated in Hawaiian immersion schools. Lots of people like myself were trying our best to help and liberate and educate people. And then all of a sudden, all of that preparation, like, it had to release the dam, and then lots of things happened in 6 months. And then the United States military and police were defeated on Mauna Kea because they did not build TMT. And it's, I think, law 800 something? It's been like, no, it's more than that, 1400 something. It's been 6+ years, and they still haven't built that giant telescope that it was telescopes are fine, but this one is obsolete, broken, and it was basically a money-making scheme. You know, this telescope was like an F-35, broken, overpriced, only served to benefit corporate interests who were invested in it, not to actually. Astronomers, 700 of them, the leading ones, signed a document saying we don't need or want that telescope. We'll take the Hubble 3.0, thank you very much, space telescope, but we don't need that one. And we definitely don't need people hating astronomy and imperial blood on our hands. So that has not been built, and the event was not triggered by, you know, it was the imperial invading force that triggered the actual event, that moved a lot of the, but the time, the effort to educate, organize, and setting the pieces on the chessboard that the grand chessboard players want to play is a thing that doesn't happen. It takes time and effort to build the economic sovereignty to develop yourself. This is things that all the world, the global South, the global majority have been doing, right? Building up your Cuban and your Vietnamese and your Chinese economies, making these. That is a long, time consuming, very difficult task. And you have to stay focused even when it's not super interesting, right? This is the problem with Western revolutionaries. Everybody's just like, oh, I just want to like jump in right when the revolution's happening, when the guns start going off. This is why the United States and the Western countries, like France included, they don't really have any actual revolutions. They don't have any actual serious material change. They don't have any democracy because everybody just wants to like check out, do nothing, and then show up on the day when action happens and be the hero, right? You want us to like not train for years and years and years, show up, be fucking Spider-Man or Superman, and then check out. I want to show up and be Che Guevara, and then I'm gonna check out when it gets boring. But like Castro did like so much important work. You know what I'm saying? And like, I just want to show up and like shoot guns good. But that's Western propaganda making you believe that that's how change is made in reality. But that's why the Russians are beating the United States in the West, because they don't act like that. They don't just go, oh, what's going to be fun now? The United States is like, well, it'll be fun. Let's take $52 trillion, print it, give it to all of our richest people, and have a global heist of the entire world economic system, including all of the subprime mortgages and all the municipal bonds, and turn our entire fucking... I think we'll just give all the money to Wall Street, right? Which is what they've done for the last 20 years. Not build anything, deindustrialize ourselves, because that sounds like a fun thing. And Elon Musk said to do it. And people like Elon run the West. And whatever he fucking woke up feeling like he wants to do today, that's what we're going to do. Because we're a bunch of neo-feudal clowns. It's called the Western world, right? And so that's not a way to actually like effectively over the long term make changes in the world. I mean, whatever kind of change. Pro-capitalist changes, anti-racist changes, liberational changes. Even if you just want to like make environmental changes, like to have less or more climate change, if you want to like move in a direction, you cannot just like, suddenly decide during that, that period where in the week when the change happens, that's not really where the change happened. The preparation to that, the decades of preparation to the action is what matters. Russia knows that the West has been preparing to initiate some kind of proxy hot war on their border they knew that for a long time. And they've been preparing all of the economic training, amping up their industry to produce the weapons, but then also making the connections with China, making connections with the rest of the Eurasian continent and the rest of the world to prepare for this event, right? Removing their reliance upon the US dollar, reliance on Europe, right? That's why Russia was not... If Russia was in a weak position, they would not have, they didn't start the war in Ukraine. The Russians actually, the United States started in 2014 with the US-backed Nazi coup when they started shelling ethnic Russians in the Donbass region, right? The US-backed Ukrainian government started shelling and committing genocide. That's when the war started, actually. But the Russians would not have entered if they were not confident that they could withstand whatever economic hybrid warfare that the West would throw at them. And the Russians have, and they've come out on top. I don't know if you know this. If you're in the West, you might be bombarded with their imperial propaganda because that's all they do all day long. But the reality is they're out ahead. Their economy has grown even with the war, even with the sanctions. They have interlink with the rest of the world. They're in global favorability with the global majority. They're doing much better. The Europeans are falling off a cliff. The U.S. and all of its allies are falling off a cliff. They're all screwed. Their prices are through the roof. Their inflation is going berserk. Their people are freezing and starving faster and faster. And the Russian and everyone who's working with them are doing better. But that's because, they're thinking in the longer term, not in the short term, like Napoleon showing up in Moscow going, oh, look, I own Russia now. Not in like the Europeans going, oh, look, we banned vodka imports. Now we've won. Like, what the fuck have you won, Germany? What have you won, Scandinavian countries? What have you won? Have you won anything? Or do you only think you've won? Because you're a bunch of idiots that sit on piles of your own murderous, blood-covered, mass disinformation, mass violence-based colonial plunder. And you're just too lazy to have actually done anything competent with your life. I think it's the second. So anyways,
Yeah, you put in the groundwork. So, anyways, okay, but let's finish this up. I keep on going off from this point, but so the serfs. So yeah, that's the point. Was the invasion was part of what activated people to move away from and move towards more like less unjust and more unified Marxist analyses. Right? Was the external attacks upon the people. It's very similar to a lot of other places, like Hawaii is one of them. According to Eric Heiser, history is a great framework for have a story like Shadow and Bone. It's also important to remember that in an imaginary world, you can pick and choose what's real. So, of course, Shadow and Bone is not a story about Russia. It's a story that borrows from Russian history and has a lot of Russian architecture, including like the style of buildings in a place like Moscow, the clothing, like I said, the names have very Russian-sounding names. So, it was absolutely a blueprint that my team building up the world started with. You need something. So this is the creators of the show were admitting that they did base it upon Russian history. And as an ambitious second world fantasy show, because everything is being made from scratch, everything is bespoke. So that is difficult. You got to really build the whole world out. It's a little different from like a historical show or just a complete fantasy show. Having those touched Big Tails is burned, yeah. So I am just, all I do is burn. All I do is burn imperialists all day long. You know what I'm saying? Having those touchstone in reference, however, means making decisions about what real world history exists in the Shadow and Bone universe and what doesn't. You have conversations that jumping into this they did not expect to have. For example, so I'm trying to skip to something I want to talk about. There was plenty of problems that we had set design and props, realizing it was such an easy go to bring in something familiar until we realized that it stood out like a sore thumb. Okay, so Jessie May Lee as Elena Starkov in Shadow. I want to come back to her real quick, but let me just see is there anything else I want to touch on. You never really know. This is one of the main characters of the show, who is also, it's interestingly Jessie May Lee. Since I'm already there, she is Asian. Her ancestry is Chinese. I believe her father is Hong Kong Chinese, and then her mother is British or European of some kind. So she is literally Euro and Asian. She's like in between, and that's part of her character. It's actually, I don't know if this is what is meant in the show, but she is definitely not viewed as part of this Europe, the European areas that she's in. She's like, she's called a rice eater at one point, and I was like, wow, they're really hitting on that racism. They're really hitting on the European anti-Asian racism when they use rice eater as an insult in the show. I'm not because the show is racist, but the show is showing how there is anti-Asian racism, and even within Russia, on the Western side, there's anti-Asian racism towards people coming from the East side. You know what I'm saying? It's like as I said, right? It's kind of like, it's not like this is where Europe starts and this is where Asia begins, but there is like a recognition that like, for a lot of historical reasons that there are differences when you go that way. And so that point there where exactly it is. Now, sometimes it's just Russia's here. As I said, sometimes it's East Germany. Sometimes it's the Berlin Wall, And then inside, in the West, there are people who are sympathetic to communism. In the Cold War, in the West German side, there are people who are sympathetic to Russians who had family on the other side and family in East Germany, but also just didn't want to join the capitalist colonial Western world. And on the East, there are people who are sympathetic to capitalists and Western European people, right? So, but you see how like there is this divide though in the Eurasian landmass. That's not necessarily a hard Westphalian boundary on the ground. And so this character is kind of like one of those. I feel like this character is one of those people that's kind of like in between that. You know what I'm saying? So Jessie May Lee and the actress herself is European and Asian half of each. Just because Bardugo found inspiration in the 1800s didn't mean the modern day wasn't impactful. You never know what's going to inspire you. So anyways, and this is Ben Barnes is one of the main characters. I have not actually seen him yet in the show, but he also, as I said, he plays Prince Caspian. He plays, as Holly's pointed out, Dorian Gray in Oscar Wilde, you know, based work, and what was the other thing? Hollyoaks. He was in Westworld, I think. Yeah, and he's in a bunch of stuff. Ben Barnes is one of the main central characters. Yeah. So, anyways, but back to this. So I want to talk, Jesse May Lee a little bit more. I want to talk a little bit about that because I already kind of touched on it, but so her character, where is her thing? No, this is RRR. Yeah. But where is her thing? Jesse Haley. Am I spelling that correctly? Yeah. Okay. So she was born in 1995, an English actress, and so she was born in Brighton, East Essex, to an English mother and Chinese father. Yeah, was raised in Hong Kong, and so in the UK, which has its own anti-Asian racism problems, obviously, right? Anti-China and anti-Russia. So her character though in the show is that's her face there. Her character in the show is a central figure because she's very important to. Well, I shouldn't give away the plot, but there are magic users, and the world is kind of cut in half at this line of this by this deep what is it called? Holly knows, and Holly will write it down. I'm sure there's like this black wall, kind of like the underworld in Stranger Things, the underside, right? Where everything is kind of dead and there's these kind of monstrous creatures, and it's a very dangerous place. And it's this shadow world. Ships, it's not water, but it's like sand that ships like slide over as they go through it. And it's kind of like, I'm not sure exactly what it represents at this point, but in the world, that wall blocks off large portions of the continent, the world, from each other. And there's a people, they're called the Shu. There's the imaginary world. They're not Asian and they're not European, but there's a people called the Shu, and she, one of the main characters, her name is Alina Starkov, right? She says Starkov. That's very Game of Thrones, right? Because it's like Starkov is like the Russian Stark. Like Game of Thrones is Starks, and she has a very Starkian character at this point, which is more sympathetic, let's say. So Starkov, I just thought of that. So it's very like it feels like it has a very Game of Thrones edge to it. So her character is there, and as somebody who is very important, because she has a power, let's say, can get rid of darkness, right? And the shadow is the Song of Ice and Fire is what Game of Thrones was based on, and so the shadow and bone has a similar kind of, it kind of almost rhymes, right? And the shadow, and she is kind of a key force in defeating the shadow, or getting rid of shadow with the opposite of shadow. I don't want to spoil it too much for you. The Sun Wielders, let's say. So and her friend, his name is Mal, and what is his name? So I get that. Mal, Shadow and Bone. Yeah, that's the dude there. Malian Oretsev is he is like the one of the. You first meet him as kind of a young kid that's escaping a kind of colonial reality, or a very unjust reality, a feudal / colonial reality. As somebody who is not, and he's also not identified as a white European person. He is not. He would be not. Let's say he would be frowned upon in Britain and France. Just generally speaking, let's say in the Occident. So Malian Oretsev, and also the name's very Russian sounding, right? Commonly known as Mal, is a childhood friend and former soldier of the First Army and a gifted tracker. So Mal was born in a settlement of Dvastolba along the southern border of the Shu Han, and has likely lost his family in the border wars. So the Shu Han is the kind of the Asian. The Shu Han are kind of like a stand-in for the Asian
peoples, the Asian forces. And so, and this character, that the character in the show, right? He is let me see if I get the picture of him. So similarly, the character in the show, he is the boy on the left, just beneath the girl. He has a short hair. Let me see if I can get a mouse, shadow, and bone actor. And so the actor is actually played by Archie Reynaud, he is an English actor, and he plays Malian Oretsev in Shadow and Bone. But his character, the actor is actually half Indian. So we were talking about RRR earlier. One of his parents. So he's also half European. At least he's half British. Yeah. So Archie Reynaud. Let me see if I can find his Wikipedia thing. He's English actor model. He was from Kingston upon Thames. His mother's side of the family is Anglo-Indian. Yeah. So you have an Indian, a half Indian actor, half British, half Anglo, half Indian actor, and then you have a half Anglo, half Chinese. So literally, right? And they're the two characters that are like they're very much like, you guys are not fully of our people here. You are Eastern, you are Shu-Han Asian coded people. You're half Asian. And I think at one point in the show, like she comes up to be served food at like at one of the canteens, or like a cafeteria area. And the cook looks at her and he's like, get back to the back of the line. Get to the back of the line. And like says something that's like a slur. And she's like, and he's like, your friends too. And she's like, well, they're not with me. And he's like, well, just you go, get out of here. So the European and the Asian differences is played throughout the show, and kind of like this East versus, well, it's not East versus West because it's a fictional world, but that the tension is always there. And the people that are like half in between are definitely like looked down upon, and the people that like, and generally people that are of the working class are also looked down upon. But there's also there is a kind of ethnic, and then there's also a class tension that's all kind of simmering the whole time. And then there's also feudal reality, because as I said, like kind of like so like Shadow. Let's see. I was trying to get a picture with the nobles. So like the nobility, right? They have a very stark, as I said, they have a very stark difference. So like they're dressed more like this, you know what I'm saying? I mean, they're all in their feudal gowns. They have their incredibly elaborate well, it'd be Tsarist, but it'll be Euro feudal clothing and crowns and their gold and their jewels and their tassels and blah blah blah. Like it's RRR. You see that as well. You have the rulers in India, the British royalty, and their collaborators, and the officers could be Indian, but they have the British military officer clothing, right? And they're also they're collaborators, right? It's actually you can go watch RRR. Very very good show, but it has a similar sort of flavor to it because it's set in that colonial time, and so you have feudal differences in the sense of royalty, aristocrats, and then you have there are class differences that you kind of, it's more in like with the city people. There are very rich kind of controllers and the gangsters that go along with that. There's the crows that have their own subplot that's happening at the same time as the what's her face at the same time that Jesse May Lee's character, I can't remember, I'm sorry, the Starkov arc is happening, right? They're kind of chasing her, and so there's the gangsterism, there's the like kind of people that are like eking out their existence in a capitalist London or Tsarist Russian city, sort of that kind of reality. And then you have the feudal differences, and then you have the ethnic racial differences, or the European versus the yellow peril Asian horde differences, and they all kind of come together throughout the show. And I haven't even watched that much of it, but you can kind of see the kind of directions it seems to be heading in. And you know, so anyway, so that's just some fun stuff about the random tidbits about the show. And it does have magic. It has like people who can wield wind. The Grishas can wield wind and fire. There's the and other elemental magic users, and then there's also weapons. So it's different from Game of Thrones has dragons, and there's some magic, and it's mostly medieval. So you have basically swords. The highest technological advancements they have is maybe a catapult. You know what I'm saying? A ballista maybe to shoot dragon. But they don't have gun. But the Shadow and Bone is taking place in the 1800s sort of technological level where there's pistols, there's guns, and then there's also magic, and it's much more colonial era influenced, and so that makes it so that it gives it its own. But again, the colonial era also had those feudal characteristics, right? The colonial era, important to remember, like yes, feudal, Euro feudal. Lord serf relationships were, formally anyway, were decreasing in centrality at this time, but they never really went away. They kind of just evolved, and they certainly were still there, for a lot longer. I mean, Britain still has a monarchy. I don't know if you know this. Your so-called great Anglo-Saxon, grandmother country over there is definitely has a monarchy that has billionaires in it. So again, that's another way Neofeud is about feudalism, capitalism, and colonialism all still exist in one kind of overarching system. But so the way that all those interplay is interesting in this show, and so yeah. Anyway, I'm excited to see what else comes out of it. Oh, and connecting the Rhode Island. I mean, I could go off on all kinds of updates about I kind of already threw in I peppered in and salt and peppered in lots of updates about what's happening in the actual world. So I don't feel like I have to go off too much about that. But just a few fun statistics. The United States financial system is exploding, and 08 and 09 is gonna look like a cakewalk compared to what's coming. So just a quick update on that. I did an entire 3-hour stream last Sunday, and I have uploaded it to my YouTube channel. So if you want to check that out, that's a whole nother thing that just is erupting now, on top of everything else that the United States and the West have to deal with. This is a whole another level of problems. Now again, these have been percolating up, but the explosion of the financial system, which they're pretending like is not happening, but is happening. It definitely is happening. Silicon Valley Bank and the U.S. House of Cards. It is, and as I said, I was formerly training to be a high frequency trading Goldman Sachs algorithm programmer for one of the banks that is still too big to fail. It is now ultra mega super hyper too big to fail. I'm seeing people posting shit that I used to say like 10 years ago. So that's cool that people are finally catching up, but like, why don't we regulate these banks? How can there be billions of dollars going to the same people who crashed the banking system in 08, 09? And I mean, like, what can we say? The Occidental people don't have any mores. They have nothing but, as Sarkozy correctly said, they're nothing but extremely barbaric, violent criminals. French Prime Minister, was it? Sarkozy just came out and said it, and so that's why there's no law in the West. It's just a bunch of psychopathic, mass brainwashing, mass violence doing rulers that have never had any democratic or any other kind of legitimacy and have never cared about human rights. Here's the fun update is, speaking of Russia though, no, I want to throw this one out since we talked about Russia today. Since we're talking about Russia, how about Russia today? What's happening with Russia today? Putin indicted by the International Criminal Court. What's happened today is Russia indicted by the so this just cracks me up, because I mean, don't ask me why. It's not funny that somebody's being indicted, but I'm just like, the fact that Putin, ICC, you've seen this, right? Putin's world just got a lot smaller with the ICC arrest warrant, says CNN. great beacon of freedom and justice and truth, CNN, and Reuters, the most sparkling clean, 100% always tells the truth, true journalist outlet, Reuters. What does the ICC arrest warrant mean for Putin? So the International Criminal Court, right? International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin and Maria Alexeyevna Lvova-Belova for But anyways, it's for war crimes, etc., etc. And so Putin is, oh no, he's in a deep water. He's in deep problems. Oh no, he's gonna go any second now, right? Anyway, looks like the International Criminal Court has indicted 52 people. Important for people to remember, until 2022, all 47 were African leaders. And the vast majority of these African leaders were African leaders that were going against neo-colonial imperial interests for their own people. The criminal court, International Criminal Court, is a weapon. The UN is a joke, really. The West, all their institutions are laughable in the end. They're only tools. Like I said, the US evolved a more advanced system for maintaining colonial power rather than just showing up, right? And pretending like you own the place, like France and Vietnam, Russia, Britain and India, the US in Hawaii, the US, the US in Hawaii is the more advanced colonial method, right? And so instead of like just showing up and going, this is British colony now. They show up in Russia. They show up in an area and they go, well, we're gonna try you in the International Criminal Court, right? Or where the UN is gonna have a hearing about you, or you're gonna have a human rights violation thrown at you by Human Rights Watch, or we're gonna investigate your child labor abuse. Your freedom of press and freedom of democracies and all this shit. You don't have a democracy. That's the United States. The Occidental latest advance in the Eurasian multi-thousand-year struggle is to weaponize goodness and ethics in the process of mass brainwashing against their enemies and would-be subjugated vassals, right? Would-be colonies are accused of being so evil, right? That's not a thing. They never used to do that. They used to just, they would say that like, we deserve to have your area because you're just bad, because, you're just barbaric and backwards, and we're better than you because we're European. But now they go, we want to protect human rights of people. We want to defend freedom and democracy, right? And so International Criminal Court is part of this process. And so until 2022, all of these people, right, were Africans who were indicted in this so-called International Criminal Court. All of them except the Gaddafis were black. And the Gaddafis, to be clear, in Libya, brought amazing benefits to the people of the North African country of Libya, including universal health care, including very low cost electricity, millions of people getting quality educations for the first time, free health care, free university, women's rights, women's equality was making huge progress under Gaddafi. African Monetary Fund to help fund actual productive development throughout Africa using the sovereign national resources of Africa. I mean, this is Hawaii, this is Cuba, this is Bolivia in the 21st century. This is so many countries, right? Using your national resources, nationalize them for the public benefit, developing your own industry, this is, right? I mean, it's normal on the Silver Spook talk and streams because I talk about this stuff all the time. But I mean, most Westerners don't realize that's like, what people have been doing, trying to do. And that's when International Criminal Court comes out and attacks Gaddafi, attacks whatever country is coming out from capitalism and colonialism, right? Along with Human Rights Watch, along with all the NGOs, blah, 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 NED, trying to overthrow the country with, color revolutions. But does this mean that the ICC now indicts white people, or that the ICC doesn't consider Russians to be white people? This is actually, this is an interesting thread because, right, if we assume, right, if all of the previous people that the so-called International criminal court in The Hague, right? People, oh, we're gonna hang in The Hague. Nobody's gonna hang in The Hague. Nobody's gonna hang in The Hague. The Hague doesn't do shit. The Hague is an imperial vessel to continue colonial genocide and plunder. That's all the International Criminal Court is, apparently. Because if there was a legitimate International Criminal Court, they would have tried to hang all the U.S. presidents who have been conducting all these genocidal, murderous wars, right? Like Iraq. I mean, do we have to go through these? I mean, Vijay Prashad is over there screaming all day long about why the hell aren't all the U.S. presidents who have enacted all these highest crimes of the highest crimes in international law, crimes of the war of aggression, among other things. Every U.S. president would be indicted. Every Western politician, basically, all of Europe as well, would be indicted. But do we see any of them being? No, because there's no such. I mean, this is just another way. There's no such thing as justice in the West. Period. The end. People are saying it's so one-sided. One-sided? Are you fucking kidding me? The International Criminal Court is an absolute joke, kind of like the UN. It could not be one day. It might not be a joke, but as it stands, it is a Hanani K. Trask, a Native Hawaiian, anti-imperialist Native Hawaiian sovereignty liberation movement leader, right? We are not American. She pointed out the UN the United Nations is controlled by the United States, because it is. And so is the ICC. It's a joke. The International Criminal Court is an international crime den. That's all that is. You know. That's all this is. So is Human Rights Watch. It's just Human Rights Watch is human violation doer. That's all it is. Justifies fucking wars like Iraq, and attempted proxy war on China through Uyghur genocide narratives constructed by the United States think tanks. So looks like the international. So does this mean that? But coming back to Russia, does this mean that the ICC now indicts white people, or that the ICC doesn't consider Russians to be white people? Right? No. So think about that. What were we saying earlier when I was talking about the differences between the divide, right? The Eurasian divide, right? The Eurasian divide. In Africa, right? Even let's go back to Greece. Let's go back to Alexander, right? So the Greeks identified themselves as Hellenic people. They didn't necessarily say white, but they were Hellenic. And what we would call Western, what the Westerners, right, Europeans, British, French, Americans, Anglo-Saxons, Spaniards, Franks, call the Western ancestors. So the Greeks identified everything Asian and African. Aristotle himself, he wrote in his great philosophy of politics that the lesser races, who are Afro-Asiatic races, they could have been, from North Africa, Nubian. You could have had people from near West Asia, or any Asian area, but they were non-Hellenic people, were slaves. They were subhuman, and they were meant to be slaves because they were inferior. This is Aristotelian thinking. This 2,000 years ago. So everything. Then they didn't say N-word, because that wasn't. But it was basically, that was what they were. They were considered the subhuman N-words. Everyone who wasn't Western, every African and Asiatic people. Jump forward 2,000 years later, right, to the 1800s, right? The word orc is a word that the Europeans described the Asians as, right? German yellow peril was a colonial war trope, German colonial war trope, to justify fights and attacks against the people from what was deemed Asia, right? The invaders, these quote unquote slant-eyed invaders coming with that are different from us. Christendom and Christianity is important for European identity as well, but they were different people. And so the Russians have always been kind of considered black, not black people, but they've been considered in that group of people that are Afro-Asiatic, non-European, subhuman people, right? San N-word was a word that was thrown around so much, especially online, but all over the place in 2001. I remember when I was in college, people were saying San N-word, even in the college, right? To describe those quote-unquote towelheads and slurs against Muslims who are also Asian, non-European, right? we're gonna go. I want to go and get back for the World Trade Center. I'm gonna go kill me a bunch of sand N-words. I heard people say that. Like when I was like 20, I was like 18, 19, 20. I heard people saying that all the time. And they signed up for the military and they went to Iraq. You know who? Kylo Ren, Adam Driver. He signed up to go kill himself. Well, he didn't say that. I don't know what he said, but he was riled up by anti-Asian, anti-Muslim war propaganda to go sign up and go kill people in the Middle East. Lots of people sign up for that, for better or for worse. That's what happened. But that anti-Asian, but the sand, they call them. My point was they call them sand N-words, and then they called Russians snow N-words. So, in that sense, right? So my point is in this thread. So when they say, does this now? Of course, the African history this can't be equated with Russian history. These are different peoples. I don't want to say that they are that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the ICC indicting Russians, does it mean that white people can now be indicted, or is the ICC consider Russians not white people? The West never really considered Russians as a whole to really be white people. Yeah, their skin color is like a very important point. An Asian person was pointing out that in fact, God, I should have saved that thread. They made a very important point, which is that a lot of Asians are identified as. Let me see if I can get Luna and EJ. Okay, just put Luna. Luna is Vietnamese, right? Vietnamese woman from Vietnam. And American Johnson is he's one of our friends that runs the Non-Compete YouTube channel, and is Luna's friend. That is not what I was looking for. What the fuck was that? Yeah, okay. So this is Luna and EJ. Okay, here this is a good one. Okay, so also because it has tanks in it, but So in this thread, this Asian woman was saying that like a lot of people are saying that Asians are the honorary. So some people in the West say, well, Asians are the honorary white people, and so this and East Asians especially, and then so this Asian woman was saying, not really though. Asians are in fact one people that can never ever be considered European. In fact, they're one of the oldest. I mean, there's a lot of people that are obviously Jewish people have great anti-Semitic attacks for thousands of years against them in the European area. But Asians also, as I've already pointed out, right? So the skin tone of Asians is oftentimes lighter. Let's say in the actual color of their skin is like lighter, but if you look at Luna and EJ, okay? So Luna here, if you look at their skin color, the actual tone of their color, Luna's skin color is actually lighter than American Johnson. He's a white man from South Carolina. So Luna's skin tone is actually lighter than American Johnson. So she should, right? So by those description, Luna should be whiter and should have more whiteness, and she should be more white. So when Luna shows up in South Carolina, in the streets of the United States, in New York City, walking down New York City, Luna should be free of any anti-Asian hate crime. Like, Luna shouldn't be worried about being punched, kicked, stabbed, and killed like thousands of Asians have in the last few years, right? When somebody says Wuhan flu and go back to China, even though Luna's from Vietnam, Luna doesn't have to worry about that because Luna's white, right? No, because the reality is that whiteness is not just about the skin tone. Luna will never be considered a white person in the United States or any other Occidental country, any Western country, any Euro or Euro settler country, because whiteness is not just about the skin tone. The shape of Luna's eyes, the shape of Luna's nose, which is like wider, the proportions of the face, the way, and when Luna starts talking and has a different accent, immediately you're not white. If there was any confusion, immediately you're not white. The shape, the hair texture, all that stuff. Eyebrow shape, forehead shape, all that stuff. But whereas American Johnson, he's dark. He's like his skin tone is not as light. But you look at it and it's that's a white guy, and then he talks and he's definitely a white guy. Right? So whiteness is not about. It's not about. I mean, colorism is a thing, and like skin tone is a thing that is it is a thing that's real. But then there's another thing, which is that whiteness, it is always a moving target. Whiteness itself, Euro-ness itself, is itself a moving target. Inside of Europe, certain Europeans are considered lesser than between Germany, France, and Britain might be united against Russia right now, and historically on multiple occasions. But the Western Europeans view themselves as greater and more. They speak of the Slavs, the lesser Germanic races at times. You know, like the Western Europeans look down on the even Central Europeans, let alone the Eastern Europeans, let alone the Asian Europeans. So what is considered, right? What is considered like the ultimate, the master race, the best race, the whitest race, the whiteness itself is a moving target, and it's based on a lot of different things. And one of them is, yes, it's the tone of the skin. So like if EJ's skin was like 10 shades darker, then that would alter his perception of how, if he's white or not in the United States, if he's Euro or not in the United States, right? But that's not it. And so that's a very important factor so when people think about Russia, and also it depends on where it is, right? So like what counts as whiteness in South America is also different than in North America, right? So the skin tone in South America, you could actually be darker, like closer to my skin tone. Like if I go to Michigan or I go to, Maine or something, I'm going to be like, that's not a white guy. But in South America, my skin tone in a lot of places might be considered what is equivalent to white, because of what is the definition of whiteness, which is a settler colonial identity constructed for oppression, capitalism, and unjust, unequal, selfish wealth and power accrual. If I was in South America, I would consider white in certain places like Brazil and possibly in like Bolivia. But it depends, right? It's a moving target. It's just like and race has more to do with what people, the kind of basic phenotypical expressions of who you are. Ethnicity or nationality, as is understood by people like Native Hawaiians and a lot of indigenous peoples, is not really based on the shape of your face, the color, the texture of your hair. You could have very dark skin, very textured hair, very wide nose, or you could have there are very dark African looking Hawaiians, and they're very light, almost Caucasian looking Hawaiians. Maybe not quite as white as someone from like Norway, but there were very light skinned Hawaiians, and there were medium brown Hawaiians, more Asian looking Hawaiians, because Austronesian people, we went everywhere in part, and also it was not seen as like your culture and your nation, who you were, was not defined by just the color and texture and arbitrary external characteristics. It was defined by your values, what culture you practice, your ancestors, who you came from, the language you spoke, what you understood of how the worldview, this kind of stuff. That was more important. And so anyway, that's just another factor, but that's not the way that most of the West understands reality. Race and nationality and culture, that's basically all synonymous. And then when you bring up, well, why are there Black Americans? Then they get weird. And most of America is like, they're not really Americans. What about Asian Americans, right? When you see an Asian person in San Francisco, or if you see if an Asian person like comes into a diner in, I don't know, Oregon, like it happens in Wu Assassins, the probability that you will get asked, where are you from? And then you're like, well, I'm from Michigan. I'm from Oregon. And then they go, no, where are you really from? Where are you really from? Right? Because the implication is you can't be Asian American. The only thing you can be is a foreigner. Right? And so it's like, well, but that's the schizophrenia, that's the absolute duplicity and malice of the West and the United States, which is that we only use whatever category we want that benefits us at the moment. So the second that we can get away with, well, you should have your Asian business closed down because you're a foreigner, then all the white businesses will close them down. It's called the pogroms of the 1800s, and it's also called the 21st century. As soon as anybody can make hay of fighting a war on China, the Wuhan flu, it will get me voted in, and it'll get money for my rocket launchers and my military industrial complex going. I'm anti-China, and I hate Asians now, right? And then it's like, oh, is it going to make more money for me to be anti-Russia? And, then the Democrats will do that. so it's always a moving target. It's always duplicitous. It's full of shit, and so that's another important factor when it comes to. And so let me. It's already one. Okay, so let me finish. So, do Russians count as white people? The answer is depends on what the Europeans, what the most powerful, richest Euro wants at that moment. Do they want them to count as white or not? Right? If it benefits some Republicans right now, like Tucker Carlson's like, yeah, those are our friends, man. Why do you fight? But that's mostly because the Democrats were going so hard for the war in Ukraine, and Biden has, direct. Biden, Nuland, Blinken, a lot of the neocons in the cabinet in the Democratic Party have direct connections to starting the coup and have direct ties to specifically proxy war in Russia. And the Republicans, not because the Republicans give a fuck about Russia, really. No, it's just that it's expedient for their economic, neo-feudal, capitalist, and clout and viewer demographic, selfish, self-serving benefit. That's why they, not because, not because Donald Trump really loves Russia. I don't think. Not because the Fox News anchors really care about Russia. It's just that it's a convenient thing to use right now. But they still want to start a war. It's mostly on China. Not that the Democrats don't want to start also a war. They all want to start war on everyone. But it's just politically expedient because of the Trump era, the Hillary Clinton ties, and the Hillary Clinton and Russia Gate. It's kind of like Russia Gate made it. So MSNBC and the Democrats are going to go all hard on, Russia Gate, Russia. Well, we're going to go. Why are we fighting this stupid war on them? Let's fight some other war, like on China. So, anyways. Okay, so does this mean that ICC now indicts white people, or that ICC doesn't consider Russians to be white people? The ICC arrest warrant on Putin ensures that there can be no negotiated solution to the war. How can the West negotiate with the criminal? Why would Russia negotiate with the West? Putin couldn't even go to the West if he wanted now. Before celebrating this, Westerners should be clear this means bloodier, longer war, more deaths, more destruction. Eastern diplomacy this year brought sworn enemies, Iran and Saudi Arabia, to restore relations. Western diplomacy blew up Germany's energy supply and ensured indicting Putin that there will be no negotiated end to this war. China will probably be the one to end this dispute as well. No, I mean, like the United States, the West don't care about, they don't want to end any disputes. The U.S.'s plan is to put as much of the world into chaos, havoc, and war, and destroy everything, and make war, sell weapons as people fight over the water that runs out. Water war. I mean, it's literally in Battlefield 2042. You want to know the U.S. long-term plan? Play a first-person shooter, large AAA game. Like Battlefield 2042. Infinite war. Blow up the built-in road. Let's just cause chaos and havoc everywhere. Because if chaos and havoc, for the West, if the rest of the world unites in peace and prosperity and getting climate change, and it's actually beneficial for the West, its rulers, to have climate change go completely out of control. That's why they keep publishing all these climate doom, and it's inevitable because they want it to go out of control, because in the chaos, they might be able to reign over the death and destruction by stomping everyone else back down. Like the planet will be hurt, species will die, humanity, millions of people will die, but that's fine. They don't care because the West has no legitimacy and they're a bunch of fucking psychopaths. They literally want to reign over the ashes. Whereas the East is like, let's have everyone empowered and have win-win cooperation. Let's end these wars. Let's end this ridiculous, unnecessary war. They're not perfect, but it's like we still have challenges after that, but we won't have this unhinged, warmonger, imperialist, colonial Euro psychos running this planet that want to literally get us all nuked, burned, or caught up in endless wars over drops of un-PFAS-filled water. The U.S. military, I almost want to think, the U.S. military is putting bases around the world so they can specifically dump jet fuel and PFAS into everything so that the United States hedge funds can bid up the price of water and control it. Like they're using Mad Max Fury Road like some kind of weird blueprint. Mad Max Fury Road plus Cyberpunk 2077 plus Battlefield 2042. I almost feel bad for making cyberpunk games and dystopian fiction games now, because it's like every time you make one, the U.S. takes it as a blueprint. Oh, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to cause a zombie apocalypse. We'll get rid of the excess population by having mass, bioengineered plagues kill millions of people. And we'll kill everyone else with water wars, and we'll poison everyone's water. And then we'll cause infinite, needless proxy war, endless violence. And then all the chaos will make a lot of money. in all the chaos. We'll make a lot of money. Everything will, but that's Neofeud and that's Terminus Machina. Everything will die and everything will burn, but a handful of people will make a lot of money. To spend on what? Right? What are you going to spend all your money on, Westerner? Right? I'm trying to find my Neofeud picture, but that is the like in the Neofeud history, in the lore of my game, and this is a good segue to end. In the history of Neofeud, all of those problems happen, and then the whole world is full of a giant sprawling slum crossed with a third world favela crossed with a landfill, and everyone else. Well, the whole environment is destroyed, and most of life is dead. And then all the rich just levitate off the planet and float above it all. And they just kind of like, I guess we'll just hang out here until we all die. So that's Neofeud though. But anyways, so in conclusion though, Shadow and Bone is a cool show. Do check it out. Interesting premise. There's a steamy romance and plots like that, because that's a thing that you gotta get in there. I mean, I didn't see any nudity at the level of Jason Momoa with Daenerys Targaryen yet, so there's not quite that. But this there is like it's a show that has all the aspects that you would want out of a alternate history, 1800s. I don't know what you call that. I don't even know genre now. Steampunk? Fuck, I don't know. Steampunk with SARS in it. Tsarpunk. Steampunk alternate history show. So anyways, that's cool. And remember, the world island is being connected together. That's the Belt and Road Initiative. That's the multipolar world. Hawaiians are getting in on that game. And I do recommend that you support us in that by checking out. There's lots of businesses. Let me get. I had a link to all of these Hawaii businesses that are getting online. Native Hawaiian collective. Kanaka Maoli owned and operated businesses that are interlinking to build the self-sufficiency, self-determination, and sovereignty, such as Konane Gear, Lea Organics, Moonkind Things, Drip Studios, Naike Shoyu, on all the islands, Kipuka Lanai Farms, Poli Poli Farms, rooted in Wailuku. I know Holly talks about Moonkind Things. I heard about that one. Hui Mao, Kanaka Du Kanaka, Ohana Productions. Now, obviously, Silver Spoon, we don't work directly with the Purple Maya, but of course, Silver Spoon Games is another anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, Hawaiian-operated cooperative business here with myself and Holly. And if you'd like to support us, don't forget you can check out, you can give us direct support through Ko-Fi and Patreon. That is massively appreciated, because without that support, we do not have the funds to keep on streaming and keep the lights on and keep all of the material conditions met for the children's here that we have. And of course, and if you get a Silver Spook Discord access, the Silver Spook University, which is thousands of hours of content, video, and threads categorized by topics. And you also get access to behind the scenes updates on what we're doing here. And of course, also, you can also get Neofeud, whose trailer I will now play for a moment, and then I'll be right back.
The Illuminati created us. They wanted to build a god with their own hands, and instead they created us.
Just because I'm made of silicone and aluminium, I must be doing something wrong. That's machine stereotyping, that is.
That's reality, that is. Machines are second-class citizens.
Humans are sentient persons by default, ma'am. They have personhood by heredity.
There are thousands upon thousands of overqualified slum dwellers. You are my peon. Don't you get it?
This wasn't a job. It was always just an excommunication sentence.
We're pawns in a feud bigger than we can imagine. Turn the cogs of the machine before Leviathan grinds you up and swallows you and yours.
We don't get to choose our hand, comrade. Prince, peon, rich, poor, human, robot.
I invented the crux of the royal's power, the secret to consciousness, our existence itself, the meaning of life.
I'm the $6 billion baller, not some troubled youth.
You are my greatest creation of all.
I had to build my own family. I ain't your son. I ain't your son.
I'm happy to smash all of the crowns and throw the gold shards down to the people. I will be the iconoclast queen.
But who makes you queen anyway? You? You in whose army, princess? You in whose army?
Anyway, so so Neofeud is already out. Of course, it is on sale. I know GDC, the game game developer conference is happening right now. I cannot afford to go there, and for other reasons, we're not going there. But you can support us here at the Silver Spook cooperative as well by grabbing Neofeud, which is on sale on Steam in the spring sale. So consider grabbing that, and it is also kind of Mega Man Zero. Is it really like that? Well, I guess it's a retro game. It is like Stray, but without a cat protagonist. And if you have a second to leave even a very short review, consider doing that because it does help to get the game recognized in the Steam algorithm. It is massively appreciated. Also, you can grab Neofeud on itch.io for Windows, Mac, and Linux. And it's also DRM free, and you can also get it with the maximum revenue. You can donate any amount of extra above the cost of the game to give the maximum revenue to us, and also we get the maximum cut of the revenue at itch.io. There's, of course, speaking of straight up decolonization, Decolonators is a game. I spoke of Vietnam a little bit. Decolonators is a game where you kick capitalist colonizer butts like the United States out of Vietnam in retro arcade game glory. So there's a game that you can play. This is like RRR, the video game. You know what I'm saying? You just just fight colonizers out of your country. You know what I'm saying? So it did just star as another game set in the world of Neofeud and Neofeud 2. If you already have Neofeud 1 and you're waiting for Neofeud 2, I am working as hard as possible on Neofeud 2. I'm going to show some of that maybe later on today. But and Pigeon with Gun is another game where you are a pigeon with a gun that fights robot gajillionaires, bougie gentrifying F-16 pilots, and heart-stealing liberal politicians and tons of corporate-owned cops in Pigeon with Gun. And of course, you can also grab Holly's book, which is called Woman. Holly's my partner, and Holly wrote this book about her experiences having grown up in a woman in evangelical Protestant Christianity. And it is not a historical retelling, but a work of fiction that is kind of the story of the Bible from Mary's perspective. And she is, and this book is free, and also you can throw some money our way when you grab it. You can follow at Silverspook Games at octodon.social, at Silverspook Games at don't forget to like the stream, of course, and etc. But you can also follow at Silverspook Games at octodon.social, at Silverspook Games at mastodon.social, as well as you can also follow on Twitter at Silverspook Guy for my personal takes and opinions and such, and Silverspook Games for the games related stuff. And we also have Facebook, Instagram, and Terminus C is another Silverspook game that is a low poly cyberpunk immersive sim in the vein of late 90s PC games like Deus Ex and System Shock 2. And it's a game that's nearly completed, so if you want to keep up to date on that, you can. Yeah, this is some screenshots from it. I am the content director. I'm the content director and lead writer of this game, so it's another Silverspook game. And if you want to keep up with that, join the Discord, follow it here. And of course, you can follow Holly. Holly at the Tech Fairy is, of course, a producer, manager, writer, poet, educator, mod here, married to myself at the Silverspook Cooperative. Cooperative in romance and cooperative in business and cooperative in raising of children and housing. And producer and manager with Kate Nix TV, parent to 2 Keiki in Hawaii. Oh, KNX TV is, of course, a chaotic cabaret Twitch stream variety show with lots of cool music and art in it. Holly writes for and produces for. And Holly also tweets important things like that. And, yeah. And so thanks, everybody, for watching that. Thanks to all these Patreon patrons for your always appreciated support. I think we added one, but I think I already put their name up there, so that's good. Yeah, without your support, this is not possible. So yeah, consider joining them Patreons and supporting the people who produce the content that you enjoy, and or give a direct one-time Ko-Fi donation. And Bug Soup will return next Sunday. Okay, yeah. So not this Sunday, but next Sunday. We might, hopefully next Sunday, Holly might be on for Bug Soup. So thanks everybody for watching. Thanks. Good to see Big Teal and everyone else who's hopped in that chat. We'll be back in the evening around 9 Pacific time. Daylight savings is shifted again, so about 9 Pacific time. Keep your mirror shades polished. Be excellent to each other. You know, watch out for those shadows and all those bones. You know, you know, and you know, just you know, get ready for the connection of the world island and the end of the end of this Eurasian struggle, and it's not looking good for the Occident. Okay.